Winter had always been harsh in the north, but this year it felt even colder, as if the land itself knew something had shifted. Ned Stark sat in the hall of Winterfell, the weight of the north pressing down on him heavier than any armor he had ever worn. The rebellion against the Iron Throne had left the southern kingdoms in chaos, and the whispers that reached the north spoke of a realm torn apart by betrayal, greed, and fear. But Ned was no stranger to such challenges. Duty, honor, and the Stark name demanded that he step into the void left by a crumbling kingdom. When Robert Baratheon took the throne, Ned had refused the crown, believing that his place was in the north. But now, with Robert's reckless rule ending in a bloody aftermath and the Lannisters tightening their grip on the south, the north could no longer afford to sit idle. The lords of the region had gathered in Winterfell under the guise of council, but their eyes betrayed a hunger for power, for protection, for leadership. And all of them knew that if anyone could unite the north, it was Ned Stark. He walked among them, his presence commanding without needing to speak. The cold stone walls echoed with the soft crackle of fire as lords and bannermen murmured among themselves. "Eddard," one of them said, "if you refuse the Iron Throne, who will hold us together? Who will answer for the north if the south comes for us?" Ned remained silent for a moment, staring into the flames. His mind wandered to the blood he had seen spilled in the name of justice, to the faces of his children, to the lessons he had tried to teach them about honor and the cost it demanded. Accepting the crown for the North was not about ambition. It was about survival, about ensuring that the people he loved and the lands he had sworn to protect would not be trampled beneath the boots of southern kings who cared nothing for the harsh lands of the North. A servant brought him a letter, the wax seal already broken. Ned broke the paper, scanning the words quickly. It was from Lord Manderley, speaking of a threat rising from the southern borders, a Lannister-backed force marching north, hoping to assert control over the independent lords. The message was clear. The North needed a strong hand, a guiding presence, and they would follow only someone whose honor could not be questioned. Ned folded the letter and placed it back on the table, his jaw tightening. The North would not bend the knee to southern tyrants, not when he could stand as their shield and their voice. The lords looked at him expectantly, waiting for his answer, their lives and the lives of their people balanced on his decision. Finally, Ned Stark spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "The North does not bow to the South. We will stand together, not as vassals, but as rulers of our own destiny. I will take the Iron Throne for the North, not for power, not for glory, but because it is our duty to protect what is ours." A murmur of approval ran through the hall, slowly rising to a roar. Some of the lords knelt, some raised their fists, and a few even dared to shed tears. Ned's decision was not just a declaration, it was a promise, and in that promise, the North saw hope. But hope, Ned knew, was a dangerous thing, because as soon as he made the decision to claim the Iron Throne, he also painted a target on his back. The Lannisters would not sit idle. The southern kingdoms would not accept a northern king lightly, and even among the North, loyalty could be tested. He left the hall that night, walking through the snow-covered courtyard, the wind biting at his face. The banners of House Stark flapped in the cold, like the very heartbeat of the North calling him forward. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the gate, his young face serious. "Father," he said, "do you think the South will come for us?" Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, looking down at him with the kind of stern affection only a father could offer. "They will," he said quietly, "but we will be ready. The North does not give up, the North does not kneel, and the North does not forget." In that moment, Ned Stark knew that taking the Iron Throne for the North was only the beginning. The game had changed, and the pieces were already moving. Winterfell would not just be a stronghold, it would be the heart of a North that would rise, unbroken, against anyone who dared challenge it. The days after Ned Stark's decision were filled with a tense energy that seemed to seep into every corner of Winterfell. Messengers rode in from distant keeps, bringing word of bannermen pledging their loyalty, yet some letters carried caution or veiled threats. The North had always been proud, fiercely independent, and now that pride had a living symbol in their lord. Ned spent hours in his chambers, poring over maps of the North, noting which castles could be reinforced, which allies could be relied upon, and where the Lannister-backed forces might strike first. Every decision felt monumental. Every step had consequences. Winter had come early that year, and snow drifts were already forming along the walls, reminding Ned that survival in the north demanded as much vigilance as war itself. Sansa, now older and wiser from the lessons Winterfell had forced upon her, watched her father with quiet admiration. She had seen him refuse the throne once, and she had felt the weight of that decision, how it shaped their family and their fate. Now, seeing him claim a crown for the North, not out of ambition, but out of duty, made her heart swell with both hope and fear. She knew the South would not yield quietly. She also knew that even among their own, ambition and old grudges might flare into dangerous conflicts. "Father," she said one evening as they walked the frozen courtyard, "the lords who pledged loyalty, do you trust all of them?" Ned's eyes, grey and steady, met hers. "Trust is not something we can afford blindly," he said. "Some will follow out of fear, some out of hope, and some because they have no choice. But we will test them, and those who falter will see the consequences. The North cannot be weak, not now." Robb, eager and burning with the youthful fire of a Stark, trained with the men-at-arms day and night. Every swing of his sword, every strike he made against the wooden dummies in the yard, reminded him that leadership was not just about words, it was about action. The news from the south only strengthened their resolve. Lannister forces were moving north faster than expected, and whispers of betrayal from southern-aligned northern lords reached Ned's ears. It was not only armies that needed to be watched, but hearts. Some lords feared the wrath of the Lannisters more than the call of the North, and fear could turn loyalty into treachery. Ned called a council of all major bannermen in Winterfell's great hall. The fire burned bright, shadows flickering against the stone walls as he laid out his strategy. "The South under Lannister rule will see the North as weak, divided, and easy prey," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "We must show them the opposite. Every castle will be ready. Every bannerman will know his place, and we will act swiftly and decisively against anyone who betrays us." He paused, letting his words sink in. The hall was silent, tension coiling in the air. Some lords nodded, others shifted uneasily. The message was clear: Ned Stark's North would not bend. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Winterfell, spies and scouts moved quietly, bringing intelligence of Lannister movements and the whispers of dissent among some northern lords. Ned knew that knowledge was as much a weapon as the sharpest sword. He spent hours reading each report, asking questions, testing the loyalty of his commanders. The North was his to protect, but he could not protect it blindly. Every choice mattered, and failure was a luxury he could not afford. The first clash came sooner than expected. A small Lannister force had attempted to move through the neck, hopping to catch a northern castle unprepared. Ned had anticipated this. Using a combination of terrain knowledge, Stark soldiers, and well-timed ambushes, he crushed the force before it could threaten any of the larger holdings. Word of the victory spread through the north like wildfire, emboldening his bannermen and sending a message to the south. The north was no longer a land to be underestimated. The soldiers, weary and hardened from the harsh winters, felt pride swell in their chests. They fought not for glory or wealth, but for a cause greater than themselves: the survival of their homes, their families, and their Stark king. But even as he celebrated the small victory, Ned remained wary. The lords of the North were proud, yes, but pride could be a dangerous thing. One by one, he called them aside, speaking in quiet tones that carried both reassurance and warning. "We are all part of this," he said, "but remember, loyalty is not a word. It is action, and action can save lives or destroy them." Some of the older lords, hardened by years of distrust and skirmishes, grudgingly accepted his authority. Others muttered under their breath, hinting that their loyalty might be bought or that they had their own designs on the crown. Ned noted every name, every hesitation, every glance that lingered too long. Nothing escaped his notice. Winter deepened, and with it came more tests. The southern armies regrouped, and messages of threats and bribes arrived at Winterfell's gates. Some northern lords received letters promising wealth, titles, or marriage alliances if they betrayed Ned's claim. The temptation was real. The lure of power and the fear of southern wrath tempted even the strongest hearts. Ned Stark knew that to hold the North together, he would need more than courage and honor. He would need strategy, patience, and the willingness to act decisively against traitors. At the same time, he began consolidating the North politically. Alliances were made through marriages, promises, and shared vows. Houses that had long held grudges against one another were forced to unite under the banner of Stark rule. Some resisted, but the northern people, proud and stoic, began to see a vision of a united North, a North that could stand alone if the South sought to impose its will. It was a slow process, but Ned understood that true leadership was measured not by the sword alone, but by the ability to bring even the stubborn into a shared purpose. As the first snows of winter fell heavier, Ned walked the walls of Winterfell at night, Jon Snow by his side. The North was not yet safe. Battles would come and blood would spill. But for the first time in many years, there was a sense of hope, a feeling that the North could survive the chaos of the realm. The Iron Throne for the North was more than a symbol. It was a promise to every man, woman, and child in the frozen lands. And Ned Stark was determined that the promise would be kept, no matter the cost. The victory in the Neck had bolstered northern spirits, but Ned Stark knew it was only the beginning. The Lannisters were not fools. They would not waste time letting a single failed attempt ruin their ambitions. Winterfell became a hive of activity, with smithies hammering swords and armor, scouts riding through snow-drenched forests, and messengers galloping to and from distant keeps. Every stone of the castle seemed alive with urgency. Even in the cold, fires burned late into the night as Ned and his advisors studied the movements of southern armies, predicting their next strike. Tensions within the North grew as well. Not all lords embraced the idea of Ned's Iron Throne for the North. Some whispered that the Stark Lord had overstepped his station, that the North should remain independent but cautious, rather than openly challenging the South. Others feared that Ned's defiance would bring ruin and fire to their homes. The seeds of doubt were subtle but dangerous, and Ned could sense them in the glances exchanged in council chambers and in the hesitant words of older bannermen. He understood that leadership was more than inspiring loyalty. It was about rooting out disloyalty before it could blossom into betrayal. One morning, a messenger arrived, snow caked on his cloak and exhaustion etched into his face. He carried word from a northern lord who had once been a staunch supporter of Ned. Some of the more ambitious houses were secretly negotiating with the Lannisters, offering troops and information in exchange for promises of wealth and safety. Ned's jaw tightened. He had expected challenges from the south, but to find treachery brewing within the north was a bitter pill. He called the council immediately, and the lords gathered in Winterfell's great hall, tension thick enough to choke the firelight. "I will not have traitors in my lands," Ned said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "The North stands as one, or it will fall as one. Those who betray us will answer for it, not with words, but with action." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing heavily on every man present. Some bowed their heads, while others shifted uneasily, knowing their schemes were no longer secret. Ned did not make threats lightly. He had already prepared contingencies, trusted men ready to root out any signs of betrayal. His reputation for honor and strict justice was his greatest weapon. Even as he dealt with internal threats, news came of a southern army marching toward the northern borders, led by a Lannister commander of ruthless reputation. The men-at-arms of Winterfell were called to muster, and Robb Stark trained with renewed intensity, knowing that a real battle was imminent. Jon Snow, though younger and less experienced, shadowed his father and brother, learning the harsh lessons that only the battlefield could teach. Every man in Winterfell knew that if the North fell, the lands they loved and the people they swore to protect would suffer beyond imagination. The first confrontation came near the snow-covered plains outside White Harbor. Ned led a contingent of northern soldiers against a Lannister force that had underestimated both the terrain and the ferocity of Stark warriors. Arrows darkened the sky as the armies clashed, the air filled with the roar of men and the clash of steel. Ned fought not only as a commander, but as a symbol, his presence bolstering morale. Every time a soldier faltered, they saw their lord standing firm, cutting through enemies with precision and calm fury. The Lannisters were well trained, but the North's knowledge of the land, combined with their relentless drive to protect home and honor, gave them an edge. Despite the victory, it was not without cost. Several trusted bannermen fell in battle, their deaths leaving wounds in the North's unity that would take time to heal. Ned grieved privately, knowing that leadership demanded sacrifice, not just of oneself but of others. He buried the fallen under the frozen earth of the battlefield, marking their grave with solemn reverence. Every loss reminded him that war was not glorious. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Back in Winterfell, the political machinations continued. Ned received reports that some lords, shaken by the Lannister threat and the losses in battle, were wavering in their loyalty. They whispered behind closed doors, seeking alliances and favors to protect themselves if the North faltered. Ned's response was swift and deliberate. He called the most questionable lords to him, not with anger, but with measured scrutiny. He offered them a choice: prove your loyalty through action, not words, or leave the North's protection entirely. Most chose action, if only out of fear of his unwavering judgment. Ned understood that fear, when combined with honor and leadership, could be as binding as allegiance born of love. As winter deepened, the harsh cold mirrored the state of the realm. Supply lines were tested, communication became slower, and the North's resilience was strained. Yet, even in these difficult months, Ned continued to strengthen the unity of his people. He personally oversaw the fortification of Winterfell's walls, the training of soldiers, and the securing of alliances with houses that had once been rivals. Each success, no matter how small, added to the North's strength, proving that leadership required patience, foresight, and an unshakable commitment to the greater good. Amid the battles and politics, Ned also focused on his children. Sansa began to understand the subtle nuances of diplomacy, learning when to speak and when to remain silent. Arya, restless and fierce, trained in secret, preparing herself for the dangerous world that awaited outside Winterfell's walls. Bran, though still young and curious, spent long hours with Maester Luwin, learning the histories and secrets of the North, so that one day he could understand the weight of power and its consequences. Jon Snow continued to shadow Robb and Ned, absorbing lessons that no book could teach. The Stark children were growing not only in skill, but in understanding, shaped by a world where honor was tested daily and leadership demanded both heart and ruthlessness. By the end of the season, Ned Stark's claim to the Iron Throne of the North was no longer just a statement, it had become reality. The southern forces had been checked, some defeated and others forced to retreat. The North had stood united under his leadership, a feat that many had thought impossible. Yet even as he gazed over the snow-blanketed lands of Winterfell, Ned knew the real challenges were only beginning. The South would regroup, betrayal could strike again, and power always demanded vigilance. But for the first time in years, the North felt a sense of stability. It was fragile, yes, and won through blood, strategy, and unyielding resolve, but it existed. Ned Stark had claimed the Iron Throne for the North, not out of ambition, but out of duty, proving that honor and leadership, when wielded wisely, could withstand even the most dangerous storms. And as he looked toward the horizon, the first hints of another Lannister army forming, he knew that the next chapter would demand even more of him, and of the North. Winterfell settled into a tense rhythm as the North prepared for the next wave of threats. The victories against the Lannister forces had strengthened Ned Stark's claim, but he knew that success bred both envy and resentment. Within the walls of Winterfell, whispers spread like wildfire. Some lords praised him quietly, while others muttered about ambition and the dangers of giving one man too much power. Ned, ever watchful, noticed the subtleties in tone, the hesitation in words, the eyes that lingered too long. Loyalty in the North was earned through action, not promises, and Ned had learned that even the strongest alliances could be tested. Robb Stark, now assuming more responsibility in leading troops, felt the weight of his father's expectations. The boy who had once run through the woods of Winterfell carefree now carried the heavy mantle of leadership in practice, learning not only the art of battle, but also the politics that decided who lived and who died. Jon Snow trained alongside him, learning the discipline and patience required to survive not just the cold and snow, but the cunning games of war. Sansa, observing from the halls, grew in subtlety, understanding how words could be as sharp as a blade, how influence could sway the course of events without ever raising a sword. Ned watched them all, proud yet wary, knowing that the North's survival depended not only on his skill, but on the growth and readiness of his children. The first sign of betrayal came sooner than expected. A small contingent of soldiers from House Glover, a proud northern family, arrived late to a council meeting with vague excuses and suspicious behaviors. Ned's gut told him that something was amiss. That evening, he summoned the head of the house to his private chambers. The man, stubborn and prideful, claimed loyalty but faltered under questioning. "I swear my loyalty, Lord Stark," he said, voice wavering, "but the South, the gold of the Lannisters. It tempts men beyond reason." Ned's eyes narrowed. "Temptation could destroy the North faster than any army. You will prove your loyalty, or you will leave the North," Ned said simply. The words were heavy, carrying the weight of authority and a warning that loyalty had consequences. While internal threats simmered, the South's Lannister forces gathered in strength. Rumors spread that Tywin Lannister himself had sent a commander to consolidate the southern armies and lead a renewed campaign against the North. Scouts brought reports of massive troop movements, supply lines, and war machines designed to break fortified castles. The North, though united, was outnumbered and far from the fertile lands of the South. The challenge was monumental, and yet Ned remained resolute. Winterfell's walls had been strengthened, training intensified, and every lord had been reminded of their oath. The North would not bow. The first major battle occurred near the Weeping Water, a frozen river that marked a strategic boundary between northern and southern territories. Ned personally led the vanguard, his sword in hand, riding alongside Robb and Jon. The clash was fierce. Snow and blood mixed, turning the frozen ground into a treacherous field. The Lannister forces, confident in their numbers, underestimated the ferocity and knowledge of the northern warriors. Ned's strategy relied on the terrain, using narrow passes to funnel enemy forces into traps and ambushes. The North's soldiers fought with a desperation born of protecting home and family, and it proved to be a devastating advantage. But victory came at a cost. Several northern banners fell in the battle, including loyal men who had trained alongside Robb and Jon for years. Each loss was a wound in the North's unity, and each life taken reminded Ned that leadership demanded sacrifice, not only of enemies, but of those he swore to protect. Winterfell's halls were filled with mourning and whispered prayers for the fallen, and yet Ned's resolve never wavered. He knew that fear and grief could not paralyze them. They were the fuel for survival and defiance. In the aftermath, Ned convened a council to discuss strategy and loyalty. He spoke bluntly, his tone measured but firm. "We have won, yes, but our enemies are not defeated. Those who falter in loyalty weaken us from within. Remember, the North survives not because of luck, but because we act with honor and decisiveness. Anyone who threatens that survival will be removed." Some lords nodded, chastened by his words. Others felt the tension, realizing that Ned Stark's authority was absolute and that loyalty was not optional. At the same time, political maneuvers became increasingly important. Ned sent envoys to houses that had once been neutral or hesitant, forming alliances through marriages, promises, and shared vows of protection. Some resisted, fearful of the growing influence of the Starks, yet the power of unity and the threat of southern retribution often swayed even the most reluctant families. Sansa played a subtle role in these negotiations, learning the delicate balance of persuasion and intimidation. Her father watched her closely, seeing the spark of cunning tempered with Stark honor that would one day serve the North in ways even he could not foresee. Meanwhile, Arya's restless spirit drove her to train in secret, moving silently through corridors, practicing with knives and learning the arts of stealth. Ned allowed it, understanding that the world outside Winterfell would be dangerous, and that survival required not only strength but cunning and agility. Bran, too, absorbed lessons from Maester Luwin, learning histories and secrets, preparing his mind for a time when knowledge could prove as powerful as any sword. The North endured harsh winters, treacherous battles, and the constant threat of betrayal, yet Ned Stark's leadership brought a measure of stability that had long been missing. Word of the North's resistance spread to the South, earning respect, fear, and begrudging admiration from those who had underestimated them. The Iron Throne for the North was no longer a mere idea. It was a symbol of defiance, unity, and survival. As the snows deepened, Ned looked out over Winterfell's walls one evening, Jon at his side. The frozen landscape stretched endlessly, and in its stark beauty there was a reminder of the harsh world they defended. "Father," Jon said quietly, "will the South ever give up?" Ned shook his head, a mixture of solemnity and determination in his gaze. "No," he replied, They will test us again and again. But the North endures, Jon. That is our strength. That is our honor. And we will fight, as we always have, for what is ours. North had taken the first steps in claiming its destiny, but the battles ahead promised blood, treachery, and heartbreak. Ned Stark, the man who once refused the throne, now held the Iron Throne for the North with unwavering resolve. Every decision, every sword drawn, and every alliance forged would shape the future of his people. And though the storms of war and winter were far from over, the North had a leader whose honor and courage inspired loyalty, resilience, and hope in even the darkest times. Winter's grip on the North tightened, but so did the resolve of its people. Ned Stark had proven that the North would not yield to the South, yet the shadow of the Lannisters loomed larger than ever. Scouts brought word that a massive southern force, larger and better equipped than any they had faced, was marching toward the northern borders. Tywin Lannister had grown impatient, determined to crush Ned's claim before it could solidify further. The banners of House Stark were raised across every keep, the men drilled relentlessly, and Winterfell became a fortress alive with anticipation. Every man, woman, and child knew the coming storm would test them to the limits of endurance and loyalty. The first sign of betrayal came when a messenger arrived from a northern lord who had once been steadfast. His letter, written in trembling script, hinted at secret negotiations with the South. He claimed fear for his family as justification, but Ned Stark knew that fear could poison loyalty faster than any army could destroy a castle. The Lord was summoned to Winterfell immediately. When confronted, he faltered under Ned's calm gaze, unable to deny the evidence of his actions. Ned's voice was steady, yet unyielding. The North survives because we stand together. Those who break that bond endanger not just themselves, but everyone they claim to protect. Leave now, or prove your loyalty through deeds, not words. The man chose to leave, but the message was clear. Betrayal would be met with decisive action. Meanwhile, Robb Stark continued to train tirelessly, learning to lead the troops in his father's stead. Jon Snow shadowed him, gaining experience in both combat and command. Every drill, every mock battle, was more than preparation. It was shaping the next generation of leaders who would defend the North when Ned could no longer be at every front. Arya, still restless and sharp, moved through Winterfell silently, her training in stealth and agility becoming almost second nature. Bran spent hours with Maester Luwin, studying maps, histories, and the tactics of ancient wars, learning that knowledge could be as lethal as any sword. Sansa, observing her father's negotiations and decisions, began to understand the subtleties of diplomacy and influence, quietly building her own strength within the halls of Winterfell. The Southern Army finally arrived at the outskirts of the Northern Territories, their banners flapping arrogantly in the wind. The sheer size of the Lannister forces would have intimidated any other leader, but Ned Stark was not just any leader. He had the advantage of terrain, knowledge of the land, and the unwavering loyalty of those who had chosen to stand with him. Using the frozen rivers, narrow passes, and forests as natural defenses, Ned orchestrated a series of ambushes that thinned the enemy ranks before the main battle could even begin. The clash that followed was brutal. Snow turned to slush as blood soaked the ground. Arrows darkened the sky, steel clashed with steel, and the roar of men filled the frozen air. Ned fought alongside his men, not as a distant commander, but as a symbol of the North's resolve. Robb led the cavalry with precision, and Jon, though younger, proved himself capable and quick-thinking, saving a flank that could have been overrun. The Lannister forces, confident in their superior numbers, were forced to retreat in disarray, shocked at the North's ferocity and strategic cunning. Victory, however, did not come without cost. Many loyal bannermen fell, their lives claimed by the chaos of battle. Ned felt each loss deeply, understanding that the cost of leadership was measured not only in victories, but in the lives of those who followed him. He ordered their bodies returned to Winterfell for proper burials, each marked with honor, and reminded his men that every sacrifice strengthened the North's unity and resolve. Even in victory, the North was tested, and Ned knew that future battles would demand even greater endurance and strategy. Back within Winterfell, political intrigue continued to simmer. Some lords, shaken by the war and fearful of the Lannisters' wrath, began to question Ned's authority, seeking to curry favor with the South in secret. Ned, ever vigilant, worked to root out these whispers. He held private audiences, observing their reactions, testing their loyalty through small but telling tasks. Those who faltered were either removed from positions of influence or sent away, ensuring that no treachery could undermine the North's unity. The message was clear: loyalty was proven through action, and betrayal would not be tolerated. Amid the chaos of war, Ned also focused on strengthening the North internally. Winterfell's defenses were fortified further, supply lines secured, and local militias trained to support the main army. Every household, from the humblest cottages to the grandest castles, understood the importance of unity and preparedness. Ned himself walked among the people, speaking words of reassurance and determination. "The North survives because we stand together," he reminded them. "Every man, woman, and child plays a part in defending what is ours." His presence inspired hope, even as the shadows of war grew longer. The Stark children, each in their way, began to take on more responsibility. Sansa advised her father on matters of diplomacy, helping to negotiate alliances and maintain morale among hesitant lords. Arya continued her secret training, preparing for a world where cunning and stealth could be as important as brute strength. Bran absorbed knowledge like a sponge, preparing for the day when wisdom and strategy might prevent bloodshed. Robb and Jon honed their skills in leadership and battle, ready to stand at their father's side when the next storm came. Each child, shaped by the harsh lessons of war and the demanding leadership of Ned Stark, became a pillar of the North's strength. As the snows deepened, another message arrived. The Lannisters were regrouping for an even larger offensive, determined to crush the North once and for all. Ned knew this battle would not be won by bravery alone. It would require strategy, vigilance, and unbreakable unity. He called his bannermen to Winterfell, laying out plans for defense and counterattack, while quietly monitoring for any signs of disloyalty. The North had survived much already, but the greatest test still loomed on the horizon. Ned Stark looked out from Winterfell's walls, the wind biting at his face, and thought of the path that had brought him here. He had once refused the throne, believing duty lay elsewhere. Now he held it for the North, knowing that every choice he made would shape not only his family's future, but the survival of his people. The North had endured storms, wars, and betrayal before, and under his leadership, it would endure again. The Iron Throne for the North was not merely a title, it was a responsibility, a promise, and a challenge unlike any the realm had ever faced. And Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell and King of the North, would meet that challenge with unwavering honor, strategy, and courage, knowing that the fate of his family, his people, and the North itself rested on his shoulders. Winter's icy breath swept across the North, but the real storm was brewing not in the snow, but on the horizon. Reports arrived almost daily that Tywin Lannister had assembled a massive army, marching south to north with vengeance in mind. Every bannerman in Winterfell knew the stakes had grown higher. This was no longer a skirmish or a raid, but a war that could decide the fate of the North itself. Ned Stark, standing on the battlements, watched the horizon with grim eyes. He knew the Lannisters would not only test his armies, they would probe the loyalty of his bannermen, exploit weaknesses, and strike where the North least expected. Leadership was no longer just about honor, it was about survival, cunning, and sometimes ruthless decisiveness. The first cracks in unity appeared almost immediately. Lord Glover's departure had emboldened other lords who had been secretly uneasy with Ned's claim. Some whispered that joining forces with the South would save their homes, while others quietly stockpiled provisions or strengthened defenses in case the North fell. Ned's spies, trained in subtle observation, reported every suspicious word and movement. He realized that this was the real danger, not the Lannister army marching across the land, but the potential betrayal from within. Leadership meant that he could not hesitate. Hesitation could destroy everything he had fought for. In the council chamber, Ned convened the Lords of the North. Winterfell's walls seemed to echo the tension in the room. "The South will come," he said, his voice steady and measured. "But the North is not weak. We will not bow, we will not beg, and we will not allow traitors to tear us apart from within." Some lords nodded, fear and respect mingling in their eyes. Others shifted uneasily, knowing that Ned's scrutiny would uncover even the smallest hint of disloyalty. Every alliance, every promise, and every oath mattered more than ever. Meanwhile, Robb Stark took command of the northern forces stationed along the riverlands. The young lord had grown quickly under his father's guidance, learning that courage alone was not enough. Strategy, patience, and an understanding of human nature were just as important. Jon Snow remained by his side, the lessons of combat and leadership shaping him into a capable warrior. The soldiers, seeing Robb fight with skill and determination, felt renewed confidence. The North had a leader in battle as well as in council, and their loyalty hardened. Arya, restless as ever, continued her secret training. She moved through Winterfell's halls like a shadow, practicing with knives, learning agility, and hunting instincts that would serve her well in a world where deception could be as deadly as a sword. Bran, though young, continued his studies with Maester Luwin, absorbing maps, histories, and tales of strategy, understanding that knowledge could prevent unnecessary bloodshed. Sansa, with her growing wisdom, advised her father in quiet moments, observing lords, reactions, and helping to uncover hidden motives. Each child played a role in preparing the North for the storm that would soon arrive. The Lannisters struck sooner than expected. A massive force appeared near White Harbor, their banners crimson and gold against the winter landscape. Their army was larger, better armed, and seasoned from years of conquest. The first clash began in the icy fields outside the city, arrows darkening the grey sky, steel ringing against steel. Ned, Robb, and Jon led the North's forces with precision, using terrain and strategy to counter the enemy's numbers. Narrow passes and frozen rivers became deadly traps, and ambushes from hidden ravines slowed the Lannister advance. Every victory came at a cost, as northern lives were lost even in successful maneuvers. Amid the chaos, Betrayal struck from within. A northern lord, whose loyalty had been questionable, delayed reinforcements at a crucial moment, nearly allowing a Lannister flank to break the Stark line. Ned's observation and quick orders saved the army from disaster, but the act of treachery had revealed the depth of danger lurking among them. The Lord was confronted after the battle, and Ned's judgment was swift. "The North cannot survive divided," he said. "You chose fear over loyalty. You will leave these lands, and your name will be remembered only as a warning." The lesson was clear: treachery would not be tolerated, and every decision carried consequences. The battle raged for days, neither side yielding easily. Winter's harshness tested both armies, and the North soldiers endured not only the enemy's attacks, but the biting cold that threatened to sap their strength. Fires were lit in strategic positions, and supply lines were reinforced with urgency. Every day, Ned oversaw the fortifications, moving between camps and keeping morale steady. His presence reminded the men that they fought not only for survival, but for honor, family, and the freedom of the North. By the third day, the Lannisters realized that the North would not fall easily. Their commander, frustrated by losses and the relentless tactics of Ned and his sons, attempted a risky maneuver to flank Winterfell directly. Scouts caught sight of this, and Robb acted immediately, leading a counterattack that caught the Southern army by surprise. The North soldiers, inspired by leadership and loyalty, fought with unparalleled ferocity. Even Jon Snow, though young, played a critical role, rallying troops and filling gaps in the lines where danger was greatest. The victory was hard-earned. The Lannisters were forced to retreat, their army battered and morale shaken. Yet the cost was heavy for the North. Hundreds of soldiers lay dead or wounded, including men whose families had served alongside the Starks for generations. Ned Stark walked among the wounded and the fallen, offering words of comfort, condolences, and encouragement. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Every life lost was a reminder that leadership demanded both courage and sacrifice. In the aftermath, Ned called a council to assess the situation. Alliances were reaffirmed, lords reminded of their oaths, and defenses were strengthened in anticipation of another Lannister advance. Some northern houses, witnessing the bravery and resolve of the Starks, pledged even greater loyalty. Others, still wary, remained under careful watch. Ned understood that the North's survival depended not only on victories in battle, but on the steadfast unity of those who claimed allegiance to the Stark name. As the snows deepened and winter tightened its hold, Ned Stark reflected on the path that had brought him here. He had once refused the Iron Throne, believing that honor required restraint. Now he held it for the North, fighting not for ambition, but for survival, loyalty, and justice. The battles had revealed both the strength and the vulnerabilities of the North, but they had also proven that under his leadership, the land and its people could endure even the most ruthless enemies. Winterfell's walls stood strong, the banners of House Stark flapping defiantly in the cold wind. The North had faced betrayal, fierce armies, and harsh winters, and yet it endured. Ned knew the coming months would test them further, but the loyalty of those who had chosen to follow him, the strength of his family, and the resolve of his people gave him hope. The Iron Throne for the North was not merely a symbol of authority, it was a testament to survival, courage, and unyielding honor. And as Ned looked out across the frozen lands, he knew that the next challenge would demand even more. Not only to defend the North from the South, but to root out treachery, inspire loyalty, and ensure that the North's legacy would endure long after the snow had melted and the fires of war had burned out. Winter had reached its deepest hold on the North, the snow thick on the ground and the winds howling across Winterfell's walls. But the greatest danger was no longer the cold, it was the Lannisters, regrouped and determined, and the quiet treachery simmering within the North itself. Ned Stark had won previous battles, but Tywin Lannister was patient, relentless, and cruelly clever. Scouts brought reports daily, armies moving through forests, siege engines being readied, and most troubling, whispers of northern lords plotting to betray Winterfell from within. Ned realized that this would not be a simple clash of swords. This would be a battle of loyalty, strategy, and survival, fought in both open fields and shadowed halls. The Council of Winterfell was tense that morning. Ned's face was lined with worry, though his voice remained steady and commanding. "The South is patient," he said. "They wait for us to make mistakes, to falter, to be divided, but we will not give them the satisfaction. The North stands as one, or it falls as one." Some lords nodded in agreement, but others, including older families with long grudges and ambitions, shifted uneasily. Ned knew that fear and greed could be stronger than loyalty, and he had no choice but to watch closely, test allegiances, and be ready to act decisively. Robb Stark and Jon Snow were sent ahead with a scouting force to intercept a southern advance that threatened the eastern passes. Robb, now confident in his leadership, had learned much from his father. Patience, timing, and the careful observation of enemy movements were as crucial as the sword itself. Jon, though younger, had matured through relentless training and battlefield experience, his understanding of strategy growing every day. Together, they moved like shadows through the snow, striking quickly at supply lines and small patrols, frustrating the southern forces. But the Lannisters were learning, adapting their tactics, and their numerical advantage remained dangerous. Back in Winterfell, Arya continued her secret training, moving through the halls unseen, preparing for a time when cunning, stealth, and agility might be the difference between life and death. Sansa, observing the political tension in the castle, quietly began to understand influence and persuasion, noting who whispered to whom, who lingered too long in council chambers, and who avoided her father's gaze. Bran studied maps, histories, and battle strategies with Maester Luwin, learning that knowledge could sometimes prevent bloodshed where swords could not. Ned watched each of his children, recognizing that the survival of the North depended not only on him, but on the next generation, prepared to defend their home with both mind and heart. The betrayal struck like a dagger. One night, as snow fell heavily, a trusted northern lord attempted to open Winterfell's gates to a small Lannister force. The conspirators believed they could end the Stark claim before the main southern army arrived, but Ned's spies had already uncovered the plot. The guards were ready, ambushing the would-be traitors before the gates could be opened. Steel clashed in the cold courtyard, and several conspirators fell, either killed in the skirmish or arrested. Ned confronted the Lord personally, his grey eyes cold with judgment. "The North survives because we stand together. You have chosen the South over your people. You will leave these lands, and your name will be remembered only as a warning." The lesson was clear. Betrayal would be met with swift and unyielding justice. The following morning brought word of the Lannister army, now fully assembled, moving toward Winterfell. It was the largest force the North had faced yet, and Tywin's reputation for cunning and cruelty preceded him. Ned understood that the upcoming battle would be decisive. He called all bannermen and soldiers to arms, giving speeches that stirred courage, loyalty, and determination. "We fight not for ambition," he told them, "but for our homes, our families, and our honor. If the South thinks they can crush the North, they are wrong. We will defend every stone of Winterfell, every man and woman who calls this land home. We will survive, as we always have." The battle that followed was brutal. Snow and blood mixed in the fields outside Winterfell, turning the ground into a treacherous mire. The Lannister army attacked relentlessly, their siege engines battering walls while infantry tried to break the gates. Ned Stark, Robb, and Jon led the defense with precision, countering flanking maneuvers and organizing quick strikes against exposed units. The North's knowledge of terrain proved invaluable. Narrow passes funneled the enemy into ambushes, frozen rivers trapped advancing cavalry, and the fierce loyalty of northern soldiers turned desperation into deadly resolve. Casualties were heavy on both sides. Ned Stark grieved for his men, understanding that leadership demanded sacrifice. The sound of clashing steel, cries of the wounded, and the roar of men filled the air. Even the smallest mistake could cost lives. Yet amid the chaos, the North held. Every flank, every gate, every tower was defended with determination and strategy. The Lannisters, though superior in numbers, underestimated the unity and resolve of Winterfell. During the fiercest moments of battle, Ned spotted a southern commander attempting to rally forces to breach the main gate. Without hesitation, he rode into the fray, his sword cutting a path through enemy lines. Robb and Jon followed, each demonstrating skill, courage, and quick thinking. Soldiers fought inspired by the presence of their leaders, and the breach was repelled. Arya, hidden in the shadows of Winterfell, struck at stragglers, using her agility to turn the tide in small but crucial ways. Every member of the Stark family played a role, showing that leadership and survival were shared burdens. By nightfall, the Lannister army began to retreat, battered and demoralized. Winterfell had survived, but the cost was severe. Many soldiers lay wounded or dead, and several northern houses mourned the loss of their best men. Ned walked among the injured, offering words of comfort, stoicism, and encouragement. Victory had come, but the war was far from over. He understood that maintaining the Iron Throne for the North required constant vigilance, decisive action, and the willingness to sacrifice even personal safety for the greater good. In the aftermath, Ned convened his council once more. The lessons of betrayal and battle weighed heavily on him. "We have defended Winterfell, but the threat is not gone," he told the assembled lords. "Every man who falters, every family who places ambition over loyalty, endangers us all. We must remain vigilant. The South will return, and so will treachery. But the North survives because we act together and because we fight with honor and resolve." Some lords nodded solemnly, chastened by his words. Others realized that defiance and cunning alone would not sway the North. They needed trust, loyalty, and courage. As Winterfell's walls glistened with frost under the cold moonlight, Ned Stark reflected on the path that had brought him here. He had once refused the Iron Throne, believing that honor demanded restraint. Now he held it for the North, leading through both battles and political storms, balancing loyalty and justice, courage and wisdom. The North had endured betrayal, massive armies, and the harshest winter in memory, yet under his leadership, it had survived and even grown stronger. The Iron Throne for the North was no longer a dream. It was a reality, forged in blood, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Ned knew that the next months would demand even more. The Lannisters were not defeated, and the North's unity remained fragile. Every decision, every act of leadership, and every battle would determine the survival of Winterfell, the Stark family, and the North itself. Yet in that moment, amid the quiet snow and the distant fires of vigilance, he felt a measure of pride. The North had survived, the Stark name had endured, and under his guidance, it would continue to thrive, undaunted, unbowed, and unbroken. The Lannisters, bruised and humiliated from their repeated failures in the North, retreated southward, their pride shattered, but their ambition far from extinguished. Winterfell had endured countless assaults, internal betrayals, and the harshest winter in living memory. Yet under Ned Stark's leadership, the North stood stronger than ever. The Stark banners waved proudly over the castle walls, the wind carrying the cries of soldiers and the cheers of loyal northern houses who had finally witnessed that their honor, their home, and their people were defended by a man who would not yield. The North had found a king in Ned Stark, not through ambition or desire for power, but through duty, justice, and unwavering resolve. The final challenge came not from armies, but from diplomacy and cunning. Even after repeated defeats, Tywin Lannister attempted to negotiate, sending envoys offering wealth, titles, and concessions if the North would abandon its claim to the Iron Throne and submit to the South. Ned received the envoys in the Great Hall of Winterfell, flanked by Robb and Jon, the weight of his presence filling the room. He listened quietly to their offers, letting them speak fully before his calm grey eyes met theirs. "The North does not bend to threats or gold," he said finally. "Our loyalty is not for sale, and our freedom is not negotiable. The North survives by its courage and its unity, not by submission to those who would crush us." The envoys left in silence, carrying with them the knowledge that Winterfell and the North were resolute and unyielding. Within Winterfell, the Stark children assumed greater responsibilities, each contributing to the stability and governance of the North. Robb, now recognized as a competent military leader, took charge of coordinating defenses along the borders, ensuring that northern forces could respond to any southern incursion. Jon Snow, having gained invaluable experience under both his father and brother, trained younger soldiers and led patrols, his skill and presence inspiring confidence. Sansa, quietly perceptive and politically astute, advised her father in matters of diplomacy, managing negotiations with loyal lords and monitoring potential unrest. Arya, fierce and cunning, served as a shadowy agent for Winterfell, rooting out spies, uncovering plots, and ensuring that treachery never again threatened the North from within. Bran, still young but wise beyond his years, absorbed knowledge, history, and strategy, preparing to guide the North in times to come. Together, the family embodied the strength, intelligence, and resilience that had always defined House Stark. Despite the hard-won victories, Ned Stark knew that ruling the Iron Throne for the North required more than military might. Governance, justice, and trust had to be maintained. He worked tirelessly to ensure that northern laws were enforced fairly, that lords acted in the interests of their people rather than selfish ambition, and that alliances with previously hesitant houses were honored. The North was united now, but vigilance remained essential. A single act of treachery could unravel decades of effort. Ned's reputation for honor, fairness, and decisive action solidified the loyalty of those who had once wavered. Word of Winterfell's resilience and Ned Stark's leadership began to spread beyond the North. Tales of battles won against the might of the Lannisters, of betrayal thwarted within the halls of Winterfell, and of the Stark family's unyielding courage reached even the southern kingdoms. Banners of the North were spoken of with both fear and respect. Lords who had once doubted the Starks reconsidered their positions, some quietly swearing allegiance, others preparing contingencies in case of another northern resurgence. The North had earned not only survival but influence, and the Iron Throne for the North became a symbol of hope, strength, and justice. Even as peace settled, Ned remained watchful. Winter was harsh, and enemies could arise in unexpected ways. He strengthened Winterfell's walls, maintained patrols along the borders, and continued to train soldiers. He also worked to heal the wounds left by betrayal and battle, ensuring that grieving families received support and that the sacrifices of the fallen were honored properly. The North had endured much, but under Ned Stark, it endured with dignity and unity. The Lannisters, having suffered their greatest defeat in the North, retreated fully to the south, regrouping and reconsidering their ambitions. Tywin Lannister, known for his cunning, recognized that Winterfell's defenses, the unity of the North, and Ned Stark's leadership made any future attempt costly and uncertain. While he still plotted and schemed, he knew that for the foreseeable future, the North had secured its autonomy and claimed the Iron Throne on its own terms. The North had proven that honor, resilience, and unity could triumph over treachery, greed, and overwhelming force. The people of the North celebrated cautiously, aware that vigilance was the cost of survival, but also proud of the unity and leadership that had preserved their lands. Villagers, soldiers, and bannermen alike honored the Stark family, understanding that Ned Stark's decisions, sacrifices, and relentless commitment to justice had protected them all. From the smallest hamlet to the largest castle, there was a renewed sense of pride, loyalty, and purpose. The North, long considered harsh and unforgiving, had become a beacon of steadfastness and resilience. As winter's chill slowly began to ease, Ned Stark stood atop Winterfell's walls, looking across the snow-blanketed lands that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. His family stood beside him, each a pillar of strength and wisdom, ready to carry the North forward. He thought of the battles fought, the betrayals uncovered, the sacrifices endured, and the victories won. The Iron Throne for the North was not merely a seat of power, it was a testament to survival, honor, and leadership. The North had faced overwhelming odds and had emerged not only intact, but strengthened. Ned's thoughts turned to the future. The North would need careful governance, strong alliances, and constant vigilance, but the foundations had been laid. His children, trained in both leadership and strategy, would ensure that the North remained resilient long after his time. The lands would thrive, and the people would remain loyal, not out of fear, but because they had witnessed the integrity, courage, and unwavering commitment of their lord. Ned Stark had not only claimed the Iron Throne for the North, he had secured its legacy. Winterfell, silent under the starlit sky, stood as a symbol of hope, strength, and endurance. The banners of House Stark flapped proudly, a reminder that the North had survived and would continue to survive through honor, courage, and unity. Ned Stark knew that the future would always bring challenges, yet for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. The North was safe, the people were protected, and the Iron Throne for the North was firmly established. And so, under the icy skies of the North, with battles fought and betrayals thwarted, Ned Stark ruled, not as a king seeking glory, but as a leader dedicated to the survival, honor, and prosperity of his people. The North had endured, unbroken, unbowed, and unstoppable, and its legacy would live on through the courage and wisdom of House Stark, forever guided by the unwavering hand of Ned Stark, the man who had claimed the Iron Throne for the North. Years passed in the North, and Winterfell, under the guidance of Ned Stark, grew stronger than ever. The harsh winters still came, and the snow still buried the land in a blanket of white, but the people no longer feared the cold in the same way. They feared what they had once feared, the threat of conquest, betrayal, and chaos, but under Ned's leadership, the North had learned resilience. Villages flourished under fair laws, trade increased with the more distant northern holds, and even the lords who had once questioned his authority came to respect his unwavering dedication. Ned's rule had transformed the North from a collection of stubborn, isolated houses into a unified kingdom, ready to stand against any southern ambition. Robb Stark had matured into a formidable leader, no longer just a boy learning under his father, but a commander capable of making decisive choices in war and governance. He had taken responsibility for patrolling the borders, ensuring that no Lannister forces or any other southern threat could slip through unnoticed. He worked tirelessly with the northern bannermen to train new generations of soldiers, emphasizing honor, loyalty, and strategy. Under his guidance, the northern army became disciplined, resilient, and feared by those who still doubted the strength of the North. The people trusted him, and the houses that had once whispered treachery now stood united under the Stark banners. Jon Snow had grown into his role as both soldier and strategist. He became a key figure in securing the northern defenses, often venturing beyond Winterfell to scout lands, oversee fortifications, and ensure that small threats did not grow into invasions. Though still humble and reserved, his courage and skill earned him the respect of the troops and the loyalty of those who had once doubted his abilities. He and Robb often rode together, planning campaigns and training soldiers, and their bond, strengthened through years of hardship, became a cornerstone of the North's military strength. Arya Stark, ever restless and cunning, had matured into a master of strategy, stealth, and observation. Though still shadowy in her methods, she became instrumental in protecting Winterfell from spies, traitors, and those who sought to destabilize the North from within. Her actions were quiet but deadly effective, preventing plots before they could unfold and ensuring that no threat, internal or external, could weaken the Stark rule. Ned watched her from a distance, proud but always vigilant, knowing that her talents, though unconventional, were vital to the survival and prosperity of the North. Sansa, meanwhile, had blossomed into a shrewd political mind. She was instrumental in maintaining alliances with previously hesitant houses, negotiating with bannermen, and ensuring that northern lords acted in accordance with the interests of the North. Her influence was subtle but profound. Through patience, insight, and diplomacy, she kept the Northern Council united and the Lords loyal. Ned often consulted with her privately, recognizing that her talents in negotiation, observation, and persuasion were as important as any sword in defending the North. Bran, though still young, had grown wise in ways that surpassed his years. His studies with Maester Luwin had instilled in him a deep understanding of history, human nature, and strategy. He often advised Ned on matters of governance, pointing out patterns in behavior, long-term consequences, and the subtle movements of power within the North. Though quiet, Bran's insights were valued, and he became a reminder that knowledge and foresight were just as critical to the North's survival as bravery and strength. Under Ned's guidance, Winterfell became a hub of stability, learning, and justice. The North was no longer merely a land of harsh winters and stubborn lords. It was a kingdom where laws were respected, loyalty was earned, and people felt protected. The stories of battles won against the Lannisters, of treachery foiled, and of unity forged through hardship were told throughout the North, becoming lessons for future generations. Children learned not only the history of the North's trials, but the importance of courage, honor, and loyalty. Ned's leadership had created more than a kingdom. He had created a culture of resilience and justice that would endure long after his time. Even Tywin Lannister, far to the south, came to respect the North's strength. Attempts to negotiate or intimidate had failed, and the North's unity and preparedness under Ned's rule had proven impossible to undermine. The South, though still ambitious and cunning, could no longer threaten the North without risking catastrophic losses. The Stark rule was solidified, not merely through military victories, but through trust, honor, and the ability to inspire loyalty where fear had once dominated. As the years went on, Ned Stark continued to rule with quiet authority, balancing firmness with compassion. He walked among his people, visiting villages, listening to concerns, and ensuring that justice was served fairly. His grey eyes, once marked with worry and battle, now carried the calm strength of a leader who had faced the worst and prevailed. He had fought not for glory, but for survival, for honor, and for the people of the North. He had claimed the Iron Throne for the North, and had held it with wisdom, integrity, and courage. Winterfell, under the watchful eye of the Starks, became a symbol not just of the North's strength, but of the power of honor and resilience. Its walls stood firm against both winter and man, and the banners of House Stark waved proudly across the land. The people, who had once feared the South and doubted the unity of the North, now celebrated their independence and security. Loyalty to the Starks was no longer born of fear, but of respect, admiration, and trust, a loyalty that would endure for generations. In the final years of his life, Ned often stood atop Winterfell's walls, looking out across the snow-covered lands he had fought to protect. His children surrounded him, each a testament to the values he had instilled: courage, wisdom, loyalty, and honor. The North had survived treachery, war, and the harshest winters, and it had emerged stronger, united, and unbroken. Ned Stark's Iron Throne for the North was secure, not as a seat of power, but as a symbol of a people's resilience and a family's unwavering commitment to duty. And so the North endured, undaunted, unbowed, and unstoppable. Ned Stark's legacy became legend, not for conquest, but for honor, justice, and survival. The Stark children carried forward his lessons, ensuring that the North remained safe, free, and united. Winterfell thrived, its people proud and steadfast, and the Iron Throne for the North stood as a beacon of resilience, courage, and unyielding resolve. In the end, the North had found not just a ruler, but a protector, a leader who had turned the trials of war, betrayal, and hardship into a lasting strength. Ned Stark had taken the Iron Throne for the North, and in doing so, had forged a kingdom, a legacy, and a story that would echo through generations, reminding all who came after that honor, unity, and courage could withstand even the harshest winters and the deadliest storms.